Good evening, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here at this event tonight. We are currently in Fora Borough, and we have got a fantastic panel tonight. The title of the panel is Global Justice via the Lens of the Fashion Supply Chain. And I have to say the fashion supply chain is pretty much the ideal vehicle to talk about global justice. Primarily because the image of fashion is so not in tune with the effects that it has on this planet, on the people working within the industry. The pandemic has really illustrated global inequities, particularly in the supply chain, in that as orders fell through, workers were not paid and they were left literally high and dry. But it's also illustrated, inherent inequities across all systems. So as an illustration of both the causes and the practices, and actually also the effects of global injustice, there is arguably no better model than fashion. So we have today with us 4 panelists coming at it from really unique perspectives to look at global justice via the lens of the supply chain. Before I introduce them, I would like to say that we are speaking in the context of a climate emergency, and one of the things the pandemic has shown us is that global injustice and ecological collapse are vitally linked. And when I say climate emergency, the news over the last couple of weeks probably has been the worst I've seen in a newspaper. The government's own CCC, Committee on Climate Change, says we are utterly unprepared for the changes that are coming our way. Drought has been described as the next pandemic. We are looking within our lifetimes at collapse of ecosystems and potentially human civilization. So if you set that as the context and you then look at the fashion industry's impact, which is extreme, on the climate emergency and on global injustice, you will sense a degree of urgency in this talk which I arguably think wouldn't have been there 2-3 years ago before awareness came to the fore of just the predicament that we're in. And certainly anyone here who has kids is going to be very, very highly attuned to that, as I do, but I mean it involves everyone, it's not just parents, obviously. My panellists today, thank you so much for coming. Claire Farrell is a full-time activist campaigner fighting against climate collapse. She is one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, at the strategic heart of a mass movement of people using non-violent direct action to create rapid social change. Harriet Lamb, formerly the CEO of peace-building organisation International Alert and the executive director of the United Kingdom Fair Trade Foundation, is currently chief executive officer of the climate solutions charity Ashton. I went on the website, it's incredible. Safia Mini is an award-winning international social entrepreneur, 20 years experience as global CEO and founder of fair trade fashion brand People Tree, so arguably setting the standards way back before anyone was talking about these things. She is also founder of Real, a community interest company that aims to support citizens and organizational leaders to transition to carbon zero and sustainability. Last but definitely not least, Kalkadan Lajes is a social entrepreneur who works to deliver scaling businesses that are environmentally sound and socially inclusive. She is founder, owner of ethical brand and retailer Sancho's in Exeter, and is currently raising funds to develop Schwab, which she will tell us about later on, and which sounds amazing. So there are 3 parts to this talk, and the first one is, let's go back to this idea of exactly how issues of global justice are expressed through the current systems of fashion supply chains, because despite the urgency, there's a lot of people who still don't understand those workings and processes. I'm going to go from left to right, but feel free to chip in. Claire, for you, global justice, fashion supply chains, what are the intersections?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I guess, the greatest act of global injustice ever is to destroy completely the biosphere and the conditions for life on Earth, which is happening. The fashion supply chain, I think, is interesting because it is completely dependent on petrochemical industries, not only for synthetic fibres, but also for the chemicals that feed big agriculture. It's completely dependent on big ag. It touches on animal rights, the way that we treat animals in supply chains. It has a huge carbon footprint, and everyone wears clothes. And so it's a massive industry. It obviously brings up loads of issues around the world about women's rights, female workforces. There are male workforces that are terribly exploited as well. But so it's absolutely amazing when you sort of examine it, that it shows you up the kind of all of the aspects. And I guess historically what's also true is that the nature of our fashion systems today, and the global fashion system, which is a Western fashion system, as people describe it, has its roots very firmly in our colonial past, has its roots very firmly, for example, in the UK, you can look a lot at how the cotton trade came here from India, the cotton strikes that happened against the slavery that was happening in America. So there's a depth as well to looking at kind of levels of injustice, workers' rights, exploitation, and the kind of globalized capitalist system right through now to influencer culture, Instagram, you know. So when I teach about this subject, it's easy to paint a sort of historic picture for people to show the phases that have brought us to the culture that we live with in fashion today, I guess. And as a space for potential change, I also think there's an opportunity, because a lot of people who work in the fashion sector, particularly that I know anyway, are very aware now of the fact that what they're engaged in is not okay. And I think there's a problem with people needing to sort of understand agency and how to affect change, really, you know. But there's a lot of willingness in the people, at least that I know in this country, who really want to see something shift. And I think at least we're sort of seeing the industry understand itself better now, because in the past, even people inside the industry didn't understand how the supply chain shows up this stuff, you know. So. Yeah.
I mean, you're reminding me that even as I say fashion supply chains, I am talking about a very specific industry which belongs to the global north. And I think both you and I read that amazing article by Sandra Neeson, which looks at the fact that there is no other fashion system or way of producing clothing that works at this speed, for example, that is so enveloping of all of it, you know, from cultures to workers to land, just takes over everything. So it is only one potential model of the way we can do fashion that we're talking about tonight, but it is overriding. Harriet, any thoughts on this?
Well, really to build on what you and Claire have been saying, I guess I see fashion as actually a great way in to the interconnected issues that we face. And if you look at, if you ask people, what do you think are the major contributors to the climate crisis, I think people would probably, off the top of their heads, they'd probably say flying, meat, other forms of transport, cars, maybe they work their way through the housing, energy, and I think most people have no idea that actually the clothing industry is responsible for 10% of all carbon emissions. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal, and that's bad enough in and of itself, but the worst thing is it's been rising and it's set to continue rising. According to some Ellen MacArthur research, thinks it will actually be responsible for a quarter of all our carbon footprint by 2050 if we don't do something about it now. And I think the reason it's rising is because it is connected to exactly those, not that you've got the climate injustices, connected to the social injustices that Claire was mentioning. The reason people are actually buying more and more fashion, and those cycles of releasing new clothes are speeding up the whole time, so people are buying more and more and then discarding them or wearing them less often. And the reason they can do that is because we've made clothes cheaper and cheaper, and we've made clothes cheaper and cheaper by paying the cotton farmers all the way through the factories and the people working in the factories less and less. And because they're paid so little, you can end up with a T-shirt for £3, which just seems too good to be true, and actually it is too good to be true. In fact, it's too bad to be true, because someone's paying that price, and at the minute it's the planet, and it's the farmers and the women workers in the factories who are at the end of the supply chains. And so those two injustices are really connected, and so if we're going to stop the climate emergency within fashion, we're going to have to also address the social injustices and the other way around as well. But what I think can give us hope is that it is something people can engage with, because most people are interested and enjoy their clothes and enjoy what they put in the mornings, whether young or old people, and that gives us actually a great way to talk to people about the issues in a way that people can engage with and do something very concrete, which is much harder on energy, for example, or what are we going to do about buses? It's harder, whereas if you think about clothes and how can we change the way we're buying our clothes, there is more that I think everyone can do.
Yeah. It's something that we sometimes talk about, is that fashion is this cultural indicator. It reaches into so many different parts of society in a way that, for example, white goods doesn't. You know, it has the glamorous image, it has the fun image, it has the... it's such a sort of multi-dimensional, complex entity, and therefore, as both you and Claire have said, it has the potential to change things on a mass scale. That's not being taken up quite yet, but there are a lot of positive things happening. Sath, again, really same question. Issues of global justice. You've been working on this for so long. I'd love to know your feelings about the transitions that you've seen, what still needs to be done, hopes for the future, new ways of seeing global justice in the supply chain that might have emerged recently as well.
Yes, thank you. And so certainly, again, we're building on, aren't we? Because of fantastic presentations from Harriet and from Claire. I mean, I think there's the surprise, if you like, that it's taken this long. That we 30 years ago, Jonathan Porritt's Save the Earth book came out, and probably I was one of the first. Do I have a baby or not? I mean, it was that evident that we were on a slippery slope, and I think. But also this transition in the last 2 years really of 2 degrees above pre-industrialised levels by 2050 is just too much. The London Stock Exchange was saying 3 degrees, perhaps maybe 4, and that finally with the science-based targets, fashion companies are saying, well, yes, we probably need to also include scope 3, which is supply chains, which is a nonsense, because of course that's 85-90% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there has been this incredibly fast move, which I'm enormously grateful for. But having visited garment factory workers and farmers and seen just the violence of poverty that they're trapped in, to hear language now where we're talking positively about regenerative agriculture, providing a carbon sink, but also supporting small-scale farmers, which of course Harriet knows so very well. I'm sometimes a little irritated, I'd say, by not actually, honouring that these indigenous farming systems belong to India. They belong to many of the African nations. It was in fact, the Western chemical companies, seed companies that went in there and basically destroyed the farming techniques that are so very, very important for climate resilience and the soil fertility that is so urgent today. So, I mean, I'm excited about this discussion in terms of framing it around the just transition. How do we transition to creating livelihoods in villages, livelihoods for farmers, and how do we all accept, responsibility when 8% of greenhouse gas emissions are being produced by those in the global south? The problem has been created by us in the north, so very much, where is the fairness in this? Where is the equity in this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so many points coming up from that. The reminder that actually, I think it was the top 10%, the richest 10% of the world creates 43% of carbon emissions, almost purely through consumption of items that we don't necessarily need to live good lives. And I think there's a real questioning of that coming up, as there needs to be. Harriet?
Well, I actually almost think that's good news, because it means we can tackle the problem by tackling it among those of us who are causing the problem, as opposed to having to change it for everybody, that actually it enables those people who are still in poverty and actually don't have enough to be able to get more if that 10% cut back. So I actually almost think that's helpful. It's a bit like the fact that it's actually a minority that fly all the time. That makes it easier to tackle that without really taking away too much from other people. So I almost find that 10%, it makes you very angry because of what it's caused and the injustice, but it kind of gives you hope it's manageable.
Yeah, I love that positive spin on it. Thanks for that. The other thing, and we will look at the term just transition as becoming the deeper. It was almost like it was a term I heard 2 or 3 years ago and didn't really understand what it meant, and now you see it in all its beautiful complexity and potential. So I think I'd love to come back to that in the second part, but I just want to quickly talk to Kalkadan about global justice and how it's been. I mean, when I think about global justice in the supply chain, I think of the term decolonization, which is now coming up more and more, and this understanding of the links. But also from your experience as a social entrepreneur with this wonderful little shop in Exeter, what are your feedbacks on global injustice in the supply chain or global justice in the supply chain?
I think I think we've already discussed the nature of the fashion industry leaning so heavily on the supply chain set up during the colonial period. We've discussed that there is so much wealth and knowledge in indigenous communities for production. So the area that I think that I'd like to draw attention to is how easy it is for Western people to disassociate from the experiences of garment workers, who of course are largely women and are largely black and brown. And I think what we see in fashion is this like incredible dichotomy, whereby at one end we have billionaires who making ridiculous amounts of money by essentially creating what my partner calls skip fillers, items designed to be disposed of. And on the other end, we have billions of people who are living on the poverty line, who last year were struck into poverty as brands refused to pay. And I think it would be, I think it's really important for us to realise why that's acceptable to us. And I think it's because fashion sits within a society that has systemic issues when it comes to understanding human worth. And so when we're talking about the solutions to this, I think it's really important that we don't take full ownership over them. I don't know that we have the right to in the West. I think we certainly don't have the right to both profit from the problem and then also from the solution. So one of my concerns is how some of the bigger companies are now responding to this growing awareness of inequality in fashion and what that means for the distribution of equity and knowledge and power and resources within the context of the solution and not just a reflection of the problem as it was. And then the other thing that I think is really important to understand in global injustice in fashion is how so much of fashion being designed is intended to be discarded, if not in landfill, in an individual's wardrobe, within their own possession and in their own homes. And I think if we are to have a more sustainable, equitable, environmentally sound future, we need to really, really reimagine waste, and particularly who's responsible for that waste. And I think that the companies who have produced that item should be responsible for it, ultimately.
Which is quite a lovely sort of connection into the second part, which was looking at why has it got so bad? Why are we here? And Harriet, you touched on it a bit. It's, it's just it's written into constitutions of business that they have to create profit for their shareholders. It's a duty. And so I'm going to ask a sort of similar question to all of you again. How do we shift this monolithic structure that is forcing us to constantly produce, constantly consume? I'm going to start with Kalkadan, actually, because often the last person has to sort of fill in, but
Yeah, so you guys
Yeah.
had such excellent answers to the first one. So lots of reasons, right? Part of it is the kind of lack of respect for garment workers. Part of it is maximising returns for shareholders. Part of it is the absence of legislation. I think that's something that I'm super passionate about is in how to re-incentivize businesses and how to incentivize them to be responsible for their product journeys. So that I'm launching a new business. It's live now. It's called Schwab, and essentially it's a way for brands to monetize the life cycle of their clothing, and we all have garments that we don't wear, right? Right, and probably if we were able to go in and shop each other's wardrobes, you'd all find something new that we really like as well, right? But who has the time to put all those things online or take all those things to a charity shop? Like, do we have the time to do that every day for each garment? I think not. But there's so many incredible technological tools now that we've created this AI tool that allows us to catalogue garments. And our goal is to really, really hyper boost the secondary market, allow customers to resell and then pay brands commission as they do, and track this over time so we can really understand the garment's journey. And the reason for that is because, for so long we've said the UK sends 300 tons of clothing into landfill each year. And how often have we asked, which brands are being sent into landfill, what types of clothing are being sent into landfill and why? We're hoping to standardise that information and incentivise brands to be a part of the solution as well, because if they can earn an income from the life cycle of clothing beyond that initial sale, then they're able to design for long-lasting garments that hopefully will help them to embrace degrowth. So that's the specific area that I'm particularly really passionate about and interested in.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. You've brought up the D word as well, which is degrowth. And Claire and I have been on a panel about this. And degrowth, and Safia, you and I have had a really interesting conversation, which I found really, really valuable, is this understanding that we drastically need to reduce production levels. And if you read Kate Fletcher's work, she would arguably say we have to reduce almost everything by 75%. So 75% is a lot of clothing, but there's a lot of other things as well. And so some of the chats I've had with Claire, some of the chats I've had with Saf the business community obviously detests the word degrowth, and it gets everyone jumping a lot. But it is a concept that we need to embrace in a form somehow. So I'd like to sort of slightly change the focus of the second part and look at these alternative business models and look at ideas of degrowth. Saf, we had such a brilliant conversation, but I'd love to get sort of your take on that. What are the potentials for this industry? Can it degrow as much as some people say it needs to, and still continue to pay people? I mean, this is part of the just transition we're talking about, isn't it?
Yes. So in the book that I'm researching and writing at the moment, Regenerative Fashion, I'm talking to 60, 70 leaders who are big business, smaller fashion businesses, but also fair trade enterprises, social enterprises in the majority world. And I think one thing that's become really clear is that if 150 billion new garments is what we're producing today, and we need to get to say 35 billion by 2035, then the reduction, so we know that by the end of this decade that second-hand will be around about the same quantity as fast fashion, as new fast fashion. What I've started to do is to create something that looks at consumer pressure together with legislation, trade standards, with new ESG, environment, social and governance, financial pressure coming into play, that we get this transition where we have perhaps 3 to 5% ethical fashion as a percentage of the new today, that increases to 70% by 2035. And so degrowth, what it means is, yes, the overall pie of new shrinks, that ethical obviously becomes the largest proportion of that, because there'll always be laggards. We won't choke off absolutely everything. But that also that craft and artisanal, that are highly livelihood promoting in not just the majority world, but also, in our economies here. There's a revival, there's a resurgence, and that we are then able to transition without question. Every major retailer is looking at re-commerce, sort of resale platforms, repair, rental. These platforms are really key to their strategies. I suppose the really key part of that is, I think, the fashion industry's outreach in terms of changing mindsets and behaviour, and also the need for legislation, because we need citizens to be pushing for that legislation, and that comes also from progressive businesses. Let's be honest. It isn't going to come from the government. The government aren't going to move. We've had several disasters in the last 18 months to 2 years where the government have refused to move. I'm excited about the value addition that we can create in a shrunken industry that works within planetary boundaries. I think it is totally possible to manage a just transition where the social impact is there and creates meaningful, right livelihoods.
Yeah. And also when you talk about fashion's outreach, it's, this is an industry that's pretty much one of the most effective communicators.
Yeah.
And so technically it has much more power than I think it thinks it knows it has to change the narrative on these stories. Harriet, ideas of just transition in the industry, ideas of possibly degrowth or anything, thoughts on this?
Yes, and I think it takes us back to your starting question, how did we get in this mess, if you like. And I do think it all began with liberalisation after the Second World War, when we gradually started to say, we're going to take away regulation, we're going to open up became obsessed with free markets. Having said that, they were always free markets, in particularly for the wealthy and powerful countries, while usually being much less free for countries like, for example, West Africa or India, to be able to sell their cotton at fair prices. Actually, I always remember one time when George Bush was campaigning for free trade, he complained that too many imports into this country come from abroad. And on the basis of that in-depth understanding of international trade, then said, and I'm going to campaign for more free trade, and I'm going to make sure we take down the barriers. But when West African countries tried to protect prices to their farmers, absolutely that kind of free trade wasn't allowed. It's this complete double standards.
And then there was the $3 billion US subsidies for cotton
Absolutely.
that totally took Western African prices down by 25%. I mean, just
led to the collapse of cotton prices because they were subsidising their own farmers in the US. Absolutely. And it's those double standards, but under all the time this wrapper of free trade, and we must take away regulation and we must have the free market, that has led to where we are now, because that's enabled companies to go on putting all the time profit first and returns to their shareholders first, because the regulatory boundaries, which are normal, we all live with regulatory boundaries, particularly at the moment with COVID, we all live with regulatory boundaries all the time. That's nothing wrong with that, and if you take it away, then you take away the constraints that would normally help people operate within one planet. But you don't have to anymore, because it's all become an externality that doesn't come into your balance sheet. And so under this guise, you drive prices down, and therefore to the farmers, and therefore you go on producing too much, which you have this compulsion to make people buy and make them feel they have to have new outfits, going back to the sort of culture piece. So I think we do need to come back to having regulation again. I think we need to look at how we regulate our markets so that social and environmental issues are key considerations in trade. Currently, if you made social or environmental considerations if you distinguish between products on the basis of how they were made, that's actually illegal under World Trade Organization rules. The WTO rules that we keep hearing about with Brexit, that's actually illegal to prioritize social issues or environmental issues. And that's, again, part of the reason we're in such a problem. And we've got to say, no, those have to be at the heart of trade. And that's why I think the climate, the CEE bill we can perhaps talk about in a minute, I think that's why it's so brilliant, because it's going back to saying we need cultural change, we need businesses, we need the pioneers, and we also need regulation for those laggards who will never change, and because we need to just draw a line underneath it. And key to that, I believe, will be winning over the trade unions and the workers, which is why the just transition is such an important concept, which the trade unions came forward with to say, yes, let's make all these big changes and move away from fossil fuels, but you must make sure that the workers are not, yet again, the victim.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that it is about what are the jobs and the skills and the livelihoods for people in the future if we make these changes, if we make this transition, so that women in factories in Bangladesh still have jobs, and in fact better paid jobs, and that the cotton farmers of West Africa are getting fair prices. And so that I do think it's really important that we build those alliances with the trade union movements, and that we think really carefully about what are the jobs and the livelihoods that people can have if we transition to having less stuff.
Yeah. So I remember once I asked her name is Nandita Shivakumar. Claire's heard me mention her lots of times. She's from Asia Floor Wage Alliance. And I said to her, at the time Extinction Rebellion fashion teams were running a boycott where we were telling people not to buy any new clothes at all. And I said to Nandita, is that something that you would agree with? And she was like, no, not really. What we would like to see is that the entire system slows right down, so that we're not producing 20 collections a year, but maybe 4 or 5, that we're better paid for the roles, and that some of us can then go back into the community and help build up our healthcare systems, our education systems, our agricultural systems, you know, so that they wouldn't be garment workers per se anymore. They'd be back in their community rebuilding their own country, and that seemed to me to make so much sense in so many ways. I absolutely agree that we have to prioritize. I think we're going through, the society is going through a huge revaluing. I think we are starting to understand fundamentally in our guts that nature is queen. You know, without it, without prioritizing it, we have nothing is left to us. And also a lot of what you were saying, and actually Claire, you might want to pick up on this, is Jason Hickel, when who wrote the book Less is More, amongst others on degrowth, and he talks about how, you know, some of these countries like India, where our clothes are produced, and Bangladesh had these thriving fabric and fashion industries of their own. And colonization, debt trade agreements, I think, a lot of these things came in to completely decimate these systems. Claire, what's your feedback on this issue here? You can go back to degrowth if you want to.
Well, one of the things that I learned from listening to Jason Hickel speak was that GDP was a measure that was invented to support nations planning to be at war, and the engineer of that measurement said never use that to organise your economy during peacetime. And we have lived with it ever since. We've been supposedly in peacetime, so we have a measure which underpins our own sort of analysis of whether our economy in this country is healthy or well or not, which was designed to help us whilst we were in conflict. And I think there's probably something philosophically underpinning, like the nature of the way that we run the value system, the economy that like actually is the king, is the ruler of how we do business, how we run our lives, which is, you know, about waging war. And I know it's maybe a little hard to directly conflate those things, you know, exactly, but I do think there's a relevance to that. The same as I learned recently that the origins of a limited liability company were actually with slavery. So the reason why you can have a company with limited liability is because you own people. So you put your business in their name. This is from ancient Greece, I think. Rome. And So you would put your business in the name of your son and probably your slaves so that they are liable. So you take the profit because you own them. So if they do good business, you win. If they do bad business, it's their problem. That's the original concept, and that only carried through into like UK systems of business governance, I think, in the 1800s or so. But that's its philosophical root. So I think all of these things are quite interesting. Once you start to like look at them, you can understand kind of, you know, what that really means. And I think for me, the just transition conversation, it pains me a little because personally I anticipate collapse, and I anticipate collapse happening in parts of the world quite soon. And I've spoken to people in parts of the world who say they are already in a state of the beginnings of collapse that they can tell is happening. And that includes not having any water, people fighting over it, people killing each other over access to water. That includes biodiversity collapse. That includes dead soil, dead ocean areas where people used to fish and people used to live from that place. And so for me, the difficulty with the just transition conversation is that it often assumes that we have time. Yeah. We don't have any time. This transition isn't going to be something that we can like plan out and make it neat and tidy because we should have started it about 50 years ago. So for me, there's also an element that needs to be looked at here about the reality of what are we going to do when things break down? What do we see when people flee Syria and end up in garment factories as refugees in Turkey? What do we see when those kinds of social breakdown happen and mass displacement of people occurs? And there's something deeply perverse about the trade union movement, in my view, having supported for such a long time the proliferation of fossil fuel dependent jobs, supporting in this country, you know, people getting new jobs out of the expansion of Heathrow Airport. I mean, it's not sane to promote for somebody's own well-being that they would engage in a line of work which ultimately is going to destroy their life or the lives of their children and the lives of billions of people all over the world. If you're only talking about people who want to, you know, work in an airport in a rich country like ours, but you know what I mean. There's a philosophical problem here, I think, and. For me, there's something very, very interesting about the degrowth agenda, which offers a chance to look at something which is also more localized, which is also more distributed in terms of power and resource, and it makes systems hopefully more resilient and more able to cope. We know that like big monolithic single industries with a totally top-down system and a heavily weighted manufacturing system, which is all in one place. If you think about medicine, for example, you know, we had a COVID factory working on vaccines in this country that suffered flooding, and it was one of very few. And then people said, "Oh my God, you know, this vaccine factory could have destroyed all of the vaccines for like half of the country because it was all in one place, right?" Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that that's like something that we need to rectify in terms of the COVID vaccine being manufactured quickly and setting up facilities to do that. But what you can see is that when you have these supply chains that are so sort of structurally top down and huge, they scoop up so much, and they sort of manage it all through these single channels. Then these aren't resilient systems. So if you want to look at like a more resilient fashion supply chain, I think that localization and the degrowth agenda is a really interesting space where you can have an expansive conversation about how you might look at doing that, along with a whole bunch of other stuff. But I guess I'd also like to look at the trade unions movement, the international trade union support networks that do exist around garment workers, and think, what are they going to do if people have huge displacement in certain parts of the world where we know there are vast numbers of garment workers? And how can trade unions support, I guess, like a health and safety agenda, right? Because people are working in jobs which are going to harm their health and safety because of real life threats, because factories set on fire, people are locked in buildings, because we know all of the atrocities. But actually also, if we know that those areas might become places that are so badly flooded that the places where they work are no longer viable, you know. So there's something really deep, I think, to be asked about where trade unions can work on something that's more sort of new for them in a way. And I think in terms of climate and using the sort of standard recognition of what trade unions usually kind of look at, there is an argument to be said for health and safety in relation to climate, health and safety in relation to COVID and more pandemics. And particularly, you know, you can see that not only have garment workers lost out because the orders have been dropped and people have not been paid, but also we've seen in this country, you know, lots of factories in Leicester implicated when Boohoo had them all working through the pandemic with no health and safety protections for them, lots and lots of garment workers who are already suffering horrendous conditions in this country that I think the average British person isn't really aware of, and being shoveled in there during a pandemic to work with no provisions, who all end up contracting coronavirus. So there's something about the health and the care angle that I think there's a way that all of this stuff can start to be tied together. I feel kind of overwhelmed often when I think about it, and I think there are many complexities, but I would like to see a public and workers' health agenda really taken as a sort of more depth to it than just thinking about whether or not people get paid and whether or not they get paid enough, because I think you can go deeper basically than that, you know.
You're making me think very much of, I mean, does anyone have any thoughts on what Claire said or what the other panellists have said? Coconut?
No, I think the past year has given us a really clear example that pursuing like economic stability comes at great cost in the lives that were lost. And of course, there are many lives being lost because of climate change as well as social injustice. I don't think economic growth has served many people at all. You know, the average person in the UK, their wages are lower, their houses, you know, are not theirs, their lifestyles are more insecure. I guess what I'm thinking is, I think a lot of power is held in the hands of business, and the businesses that are, you know, currently built, I think they're going to just, I'm really conscious that they're not going to embrace the change that I think we're describing. And so my question is, well, how do businesses become part of the solution beyond the peripheries, you know? That's what I'm thinking.
So just apologies for getting a bit grim, but so it's about what is possible in terms of speed of change. An image came up on my Twitter. I can't remember. It might have been Jason, but I think it was someone else. But it was a group of people holding back the rising sea levels with their hands. I don't know if anyone else has seen this. Yeah. And so they built a dam because they knew the sea was rising, but it rose faster and higher than they could have imagined. And it was just literally a line of villagers trying to hold back the sea. And I think when we're working with that kind of reality around the globe, it does feel odd to be sitting here in a beautiful location, you know, comfortable and well-fed, to be talking about things, the possibility that things could change fast enough. So I don't know really how to answer that, and I never will. I think the change will come whether businesses adapt now or they're forced into that change. Bangladesh, I know, for example, is deeply under threat of going under the water fairly soon. It's already a very low-lying country. So the other thing that I think we need to think is what is the, in inverted commas, fashion that we need if a world is underwater, on fire, we're not getting the food or the water? What is the clothing? What is the industry? Is there an industry? Or should perhaps these talents be moved into other directions?
Sorry, I just think it's, you know, it's not going to be us to the same extent, and it's our ability to kind of sit in comfort knowing that, you know, some people's homes are going to be underwater. I know this has already happened to many islands and coastal towns and cities around the world. But yeah, I think the question to me is not solely about how we mitigate climate change, but about how we, you know, can take on burdens so that other people don't have to. I feel like if we can't answer that question, I'm not sure we can mitigate climate change.
And that's why I think, well, two possible openings are. One is obviously the climate change talks coming up, and that's why it's so important that we're all pushing for the COP26 climate change talks in Glasgow in November, to really have international solidarity at their heart, and that finally the $100 billion a year that was promised by the wealthy world to help developing countries transition, that the cash is put on the table and they make up for the fact that until now they haven't been delivering that money, and that the future deals really are ambitious. And so I think we have to be calling on all our governments to really address climate injustice in those talks, that we really play more than our share because we've caused the problem. At the same time, that's also why I really support the bill going through Parliament, the CEE bill, because I think what that does is also say we need legislation on this. If we're going to go at the pace we need to go, we need legislation, and we need legislation that takes account of supply chains and doesn't just sort of stop at our border as if somehow, well, and you know, the fact we've imported the clothes from India or China is not then taken into account in our carbon footprint. So you have to we need legislation to force us and to force companies to look at supply chains, to take account of their impact both on the climate and on ecology, and to begin to really put that into legislation as we would with any other emergency, as indeed we did with the COVID emergency. Yeah. So that's why I think you need the bill, and personally I still believe you also need those ways of reaching out to people that to help engage everybody, because legislation alone will never be the answer, and we'll never get the groundswell we need. And one example of something we're involved in at Ashton, for example, is a campaign for Let's Go Zero 2030, which is how can all our schools reach zero carbon by 2030. And the idea, which is also what's at the heart of the bill, we'll never get to zero carbon if you don't have a plan. And you need a plan sector by sector, including in fashion and textiles and food, and you need a plan for our schools. Yeah. And the young people have shown such amazing leadership on climate change. And now it's how can we take that and bring it back into schools themselves, the buildings they're learning in and what they're learning. And so how can we reform the curriculum so we look at climate change and what we can do, and what are the actions, which each might seem small, but I believe help add up and empower people. And I think the heart of it has to be empowerment. So those schools that do have uniform swaps, so you don't have to buy a new uniform every time, and there's people struggling on low incomes feeling they have to get new uniforms. No, there's a place where uniforms are given back and recycled, and that's a really concrete thing that any young person who's in grief about climate change or beginning to hear about it and interested and wondering, well, what can I do? There's a really simple way in for people, which sort of takes us back to where we started, that's what fashion does do. There are things that we can all do, which is why I'm always so pleased to wear my People Tree fair trade cotton dress from many years ago when Safia was still at People Tree.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet, for bringing in the CEE bill. And I actually might ask you for more detail on that. Maybe Saf, actually, I might ask you for more detail. I just wanted to sort of reflect on a couple of things that you said, just to remind us that, you know, that we are, sorry to keep banging on about the emergency, but it does seem very important that we are on track at the moment for 3.2 degree rise by 2100, when my daughter will be 49. That the 100 billion that you mentioned going to developing countries
should be
going to develop,
was promised
every year,
yep,
is also how much HS2 costs. So we need to really reprioritize some of where our monies are going, and we in this room should be pressuring our governments. Legislation absolutely is key. The other thing that you mentioned when you bring in children is this new sense of awareness of our intergenerational responsibilities that, like Kalkatan touched upon, we are still relatively comfortable. There is a chance that they will not be comfortable at all. And so I'd like to come to this really final section where, you know, we're not just talking anymore. I mean, I think all of us have had the sense in the last 18 months that how many panels can we do without something concrete to take away at the end of it. And so I'm going to go round through what person by person to ask you what you feel that the people here, the people watching, what is the concrete action that we should be doing now? And I will start with Claire this time.
Okay, well, I think one of the things that's easy to overlook when you're looking at a globalised economy and a global set of interconnected crises is that I think a lot of people's agency is clearest at home. It's where you have political rights. It's where you're a citizen. It's frankly where you should be out on the streets of Extinction Rebellion. And if you can afford the time and the risk, you should definitely be risking your personal freedoms in the name of that work. I think an interesting conversation that I had last night about the just transition was like, what would happen if you looked at that at home? So what would happen if you admitted that actually you need to fundamentally change everything about the fashion industry? What if you needed to destroy the entire fashion industry, stop fashion, get engaged with system of dress as a concept, not to go and, essentialise other people's indigenous ways of living and dressing, but to actually genuinely look at how are we going to clothe ourselves in an emergency. If we really, really did what was necessary and we did, looked at Kate Fletcher's stats and said 75% less production as soon as possible. If the government legislated it and there was rationing, if there was a proper emergency response to overhaul the economy, the fashion industry would have to stop in a lot of ways, but one place would definitely be advertising, would definitely be editorial. So you would get those people in a room and say, you are the subject of a just transition. Your industry is going to totally disappear because nobody needs fashion advertising. We're in a global crisis. So what jobs do you want instead of what you do? Because you can't do it anymore. And treat them as if they're like people who are working in the energy sector. So treat them as if they're working for Shell. What do they want to do? Like, they have to change. What would they choose to do? And I think these people are on our doorstep who we've never actually engaged with in this way. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's something really interesting about taking a totally radical view of like what might need to change. And even if you don't necessarily mean that everything has to halt, what if it did? Yeah. Run that thought experiment, run that conversation, get people to talk about it round a table and say, well, actually, you know what, I'd rather do something else. Or maybe some people would say, well, I'd rather do communications that actually helps people rather than makes people feel that they're not good enough, they're not thin enough, they're not beautiful enough, and they don't have the right clothes in their wardrobe. Yeah. I think that would be really, really interesting. And again, you could look at the education sector and say, why are we training so many designers? What's that for? Yeah. There's loads of places that are right here where we could start to kind of look at getting those conversations on the go. And then I'd love to know what Kaldkan thinks about the need for the multiple worldviews in finding a way forward, because it seems really like it's coming clearly from over there that like this can't be dictated by people here how to like solve this crisis, or we're going to come up with it again in Europe and then tell everyone what to do. I think there's also there's a CEE bill, kind of citizen-led democracy, citizens' assembly type question for me about system-wide conversation and talking across borders and across different worldviews so that you actually get more intelligence into the room than just a bunch of people who are sort of, sorry to say, narrow-minded, Western Europeans.
That really reminds me when I was a fashion editor, and they made me go on the page once a week wearing, the latest trends, and they'd always make my legs longer because they weren't long enough for a kind of standard. I don't know. It was just like it would be too unpleasant. I don't know. So it's just we're talking about really how insidious the fashion industry can be, that it sort of needs to massage images. And my God, I had enough makeup on. You'd have thought I'd have got away with something, but yeah, absolutely. So Harry, I'm going to skip you and get another perspective on the CE bill from SAF as well, if that's okay. Maybe that people watching today haven't heard of it. Almost like an introduction to the CE bill and what it can achieve would be great as well.
Right, okay. So, the Climate Ecological Emergency Bill Alliance started, as I believe it, relatively recently, about a year and a half ago. It's a fantastic coalition of organisations. Business Declares, which is a group of progressive business people and social entrepreneurs, all inspired by Extinction Rebellion. We hosted an event together with the CE Bill Alliance just to introduce it to the business community, because we feel passionately that that social justice and Scope 3 is central to our transformation, to getting anywhere close to, I mean, I don't really like the net zero, they call it real net zero transition that we need. But I think, you know, it is for every stakeholder group to be involved with, and I just to pick up on your point, Harriet, the CE bill, that it is about, you know, our taking the responsibility, you know, for the carbon and the social impacts of, you know, everything that we're importing into this country, because we haven't been thinking systemically. We haven't felt the interconnection with nature or with the people that have made, you know, everything on our table and everything in our closets and our electronics, etc., etc. So I do think it's a really important thing, and with 110 MPs now on board, you know, it is to go online, to sign up to the newsletter, to go and talk to your MP about it, to become familiar with what it is. And I do believe that, you know, there's every chance that the bill could become a piece of legislation very soon.
So at the moment, I'm getting, as our concrete ways forward, obviously support for the CE bill in terms of legislation, the importance of protest, and you know, protest brings people's unhappinesses and fears out onto the street and confronts government with them. I've sometimes asked brands actually how effective they thought the XR fashion protests were. And they said the protests put the fear of God in them. So, you know, in a very public way. I would say we need to question everything, what we've learned about decolonization and the historic systems of things that we believe harmless and beneficial, which personally I think it's really interesting going back into their histories. Calcatan, Claire said multiple world views, all the possibilities of looking at other ways of being. But there is that something that you would suggest, or are there other concrete things that people can do, taking away from tonight, stepping out of the door?
Yeah, and I can see the 1 minute sign.
Yeah.
So if you think that there should be complete transparency as to what happens to a product after it's made and sold, please join Schwab. That's what we're building. And it's possible, it is possible to catalogue and track these things over time and optimise them. In terms of multiple worldviews, I don't think it's that challenging. I think leaders have presented themselves, from garment workers to raw material producers to communicators here in the UK. And what's important is once you've assigned leadership or knowledge to a set group of individuals, if they are all looking and acting and behaving the same, you're probably missing out on what the real truth is. I think the onus is on us as to, you know, how are we finding information and how are we kind of adopting it into our lives. And then whenever you're in a position where you are curating knowledge or information, or spaces, making sure that those spaces are representative of our global community. So yeah, that's how I would approach it. But I think another thing I think probably is important to note is that garment workers want us to buy fashion. They just want to be paid more. Yeah. So buy fashion that pays them well. Do that if you're going to buy it. Yeah.
And I was going to ask, just a very simple, maybe 2 or 3 thoughts, but what should a fashion company do? What should a fashion company be doing right now?
Yeah, for sure. I think I think that a fashion company should assess its model and find out how it's making money. Is my profit margin reliant on the exploitation of the land or other people? And I think that that includes exploitation in the supply chain and in the life cycle of a garment, because both of these areas can cause harm. And if that's the case, then I think they have to stop what they're doing and adapt and move forward. And it's the third time I'm bringing up Schwab, and I'm sorry, but like, you know, as an owner of a fashion company, I know how hard it is to change. You know, you make investments ahead of time. You know, your market expects certain behaviours from you. It's not easy. You can't just go from one thing or another if you intend to pay yourself or your shareholders or whatever. And obviously, like, you know, my company isn't the equivalent to some of the brands that we're talking about now, obviously in impact. So I think when solutions are created for the market, they have to be easily adopted. And so we spent so much time in developing Schwab so that it could be a plug-in solution. So brands who want to know what happens to the life cycle of the things they produce, you know, they just need to give us 2 hours to code and we're done. And so, yeah, I think that brands should 100% be joining Schwab. And when they do so, they will be offering their data, you know, for the public, for the collective good. Yeah, but the thing is, like, I think it's so foolish of us, not foolish, I think it's so short-sighted of us to think that brands will pursue change that challenges their bottom line, because I think what they instead will do is will try to warp what changes so that it appears to the consumers that it's happening even if it's not, and that's something that I'm quite worried about.
Yeah, greenwashing is
greenwashing.
I'm also going to ask Saf, you're a fashion brand, what should you be doing?
Well, mission primacy, so, you know, people and nature need to go alongside profit. So, you know, every fashion company is trading margins against morals, and that's nonsensical, really. We need legislation. So I think the fashion industry needs to work together to put pressure for legislation to create a level playing field. So, you know, we don't have the continuance of the nonsense that's going on. I think that the fashion industry should declare a climate and ecological and social emergency. I think we should be sharing best practice. We should be having the kinds of debates about degrowth, about the right voices in the room, about systemic racism within the industry and within the management of the fashion businesses in the north.
And I'm really starting to hate the idea of the non-binding agreement or the voluntary agreement. It seems to be not worth the paper they're written on it. Harriet, if you were a fashion brand,
we can buy from black and brown garment workers. So we don't have to buy from brands that are owned by people, you know, in the West. You can just buy from people who make the garments. So we don't need to wait for them to suddenly decide to pay people equitably. We can just simply purchase products from people who can make those autonomous decisions for themselves as well. That is our option as consumers too.
Harriet, what do you think a fashion brand should be asking for right now? Or doing?
I think they should be transforming their supply chains. I think they should pay fair prices for cotton. I think they should move away from non-natural products and only use natural products. I think but also organic, because we haven't touched on this, but cotton is actually one of the products that uses the highest amount of the most dangerous pesticides in the world. So I think it's moving to organic. It's making sure that they are paying fair prices both to the farmers and to the workers, that they are really monitoring their carbon footprint and have a plan to reduce it within a short space of time. And I think it's up to also all of us to give them that mandate and to really put the pressure on them, both through protest and by supporting the sort of living alternative, the brilliant brands like People Tree or like Schwab, the initiatives that show how it could be, and that by supporting those pioneering brands, you're also putting pressure on the mainstream to shift. And I still think in the end we need legislation if it's going to happen.
Yeah, it would be great if fashion could embrace its role as regenerative and adaptive.
Absolutely. And I really agree with Safia's earlier point that there's a bit of me that's getting nervous, because if we don't address the climate crisis together with the social crisis, we're not going to go to the root causes. So when you see PepsiCo and Unilever starting to buy up land for regenerative agriculture, well, better they're doing regenerative agriculture than pouring pesticides, but not better if that means they're going to start buying up land, or buying up land to plant trees to offset their carbon. So you have to, it's really about making sure all the time it is about rebalancing power, and that then is about all of us taking some of that power and feeling empowered, both through small actions and through protest, to get the kind of long-term changes that we want.
I think we're definitely moving towards a world where, to paraphrase, was it Schumacher? He said small is beautiful.
Small is beautiful.
And also local is beautiful.
That sense of place. But I have to say, I believe we have to take the trade unions with us. That's why I've got to disagree with Claire. I think we've got to put enormous effort into that and help people see that there is a better future for people.
Claire, you're the last speaker on this question. And what do you think a fashion brand should be doing right now?
It's a really difficult question. I mean, personally, I just think they should tell everybody to go and change the world, and that they're willing to put themselves out of business in order to save humanity. But, I mean, that might sound a bit, you know, it might sound a bit audacious. It might sound a bit audacious, but I really think they should. You know, I don't know what else to say, really. I don't think anyone's beyond redemption. I don't think the trade unions are beyond redemption, but I think they've been acting pretty stupid in response to what's obviously a global catastrophe, and they're like, fan the flames in order to give people short-term employment. But, you know, I think it's, I think they have to look at their cultural power, first of all, and release their staff to go and do whatever forms of activism they think that they can get the greatest change, and then prepare themselves not to get in the fucking way, basically. The powerful people need to step out of the way and not obstruct it when the change starts to come, which hopefully is soon.
Okay, and on that note, thank you. Thank you, all of you. I really enjoyed that. And so there's a lot of work to be done, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.